Hello and welcome to the White Collar Fitness Radio, the ultimate podcast for professionals striving to achieve optimal performance in today's fast-paced age. I'm your host, Bruno Dalladoni, online body transformation specialist and founder of the Health Coach Fitness. I'm here to help you optimize your health and fitness, even if you're short on time. What's up, everybody? Today, we're discussing whether carbs are the enemy. They tend to get a pretty bad rep, so I thought I'd go in and discuss them. Today, we'll dive into carbohydrates, not really in major depth, but we will be talking about them, but we will be covering off more than just the basics. So let's start at the top. Are carbs essential? So if you listen to the protein episode, you'll know that I mentioned at the time that whenever we're discussing nutrition things and you hear the word essential, I want you to think about, does the body absolutely need it from an external source? So can your body make it? That's really the idea. And carbohydrates aren't essential. You don't need to consume them to survive. Your body can, although it doesn't like it, it can almost convert, if you like, protein into carbohydrates. Now, it's a difficult process and your body doesn't particularly like doing it, but if it needs to, it can. Also, as per the keto diet, ketogenic diet, if you stay low carbohydrate for a long period of time, your body goes into ketosis and then it uses ketones as opposed to carbohydrates. So you have that option there too. Now, carbohydrates aren't essential, but your brain and your central nervous system use it as their primary fuel source. You don't need them, but there is an argument that you probably could do with having them anyway. And although they're not essential, and you can make an argument to not have them, there are in fact reasons to have them. And if we break them down into goal-specific, you can break them down into goal-specific sort of intakes. Now, I won't go into depth about different intakes for different goals and what that does in this episode. Maybe I will in a later episode, but for now it's enough to say that your carbohydrate intake can vary from 1 gram per kilo of body weight all the way through to 10 grams per kilo of body weight. It's a huge difference, naturally, and depending what you're doing, how you're doing it, at what stage you're doing it, all of that will change, all of that will vary. One of my favorite things, and if you guys don't take anything else away from any of the episodes, take this. Everything where it comes to nutrition, everything is context dependent, always and forever. And I'll give you a brief example of that. If you've got someone that has just dieted down for 20 weeks, 22 weeks, and they're stage lean, so they're inside out almost, they're so lean, they've got virtually no body fat. They've done their show, they're on stage, they've greased themselves up, they've put their fake tan on, they've got their tiny little budgie smugglers, and they've gone on stage, they've done their thing, they're done. They've finished their show. Is it the worst thing if they have some carbohydrates? Is it the worst thing, not even carbohydrates, but is it the worst thing if they have some Haribos? Is it the worst thing if they go into a Five Guys and smash the biggest burger they can possibly find? Arguably not. Now, if you're bedridden, you weigh 600 pounds, and you've got all the comorbidities that go with it, do you need a bag of Haribos? Arguably not. Just remember that everything, always and forever, is context dependent. So whether you could do with eating 3, 4, 5 grams of carbohydrates per kilo of body weight will depend on your goal, will depend on how hard you're training, will depend on what stage of that goal you are at. There's lots of things to take into account. Don't take this as some weird prescription, because this is absolutely not what this is. I'm just giving you guys some information. And obviously, like I said, carbohydrates are not essential. So how much do you actually need to stay alive? Well, 0. Literally 0. You can stay alive with no carbohydrates. Now, how is it that I can sit here and say to you guys that you can vary between 1 and 10 grams per kilo and still tell you that carbohydrates won't make you fat? And like I said, context dependency, carbs won't make you fat, assuming you've got energy balance. So assuming your calories are balanced, and what I mean by that is if you're trying to maintain your weight, the calories that you're inputting are the same as the calories you're outputting. So your exercise and your daily expenditure is the same as the amount you're eating. Then carbohydrates won't make a difference whether you gain weight or not, because your calories are balanced. Your energy intake is the same as your energy output. But even so, this is facts. Now, this is not me saying it's facts. This is, in fact, the data saying it's facts. And it doesn't take 5 minutes for any of you guys to go onto PubMed or Google Scholar and research yourselves calories, energy intake, fat loss, fat gain, all of this stuff, to see that the most important thing, always and forever, where it comes to weight fluctuations or body fat fluctuations, I should say, is your energy intake. But you still get the zealots on the interwebs, and a lot of them don't actually understand what they're saying, because you know what it's like. People get on a hype and they've seen their wife's brother-in-law's cousin talking about something on their Instagram or their Facebook page, and inevitably that leads to them buying in and promulgating the trash that is being said about going low carb or going keto. Now, I will do an episode on keto in the not too distant future, because I think it's a little bit like I did an episode on intermittent fasting. I think this will be a worthwhile episode to just clarify some bits. But you get these low carb zealots just going off, and they don't understand why they're going off. But the thing behind what they're saying tends to be a thing called carbohydrate insulin hypothesis. Now, this has been put forward as the idea that anything that increases your insulin induces insulin resistance. The insulin resistance, for those that don't know, is the thing that type 2 diabetics suffer with. And so the theory goes, the hypothesis goes, that anything that increases insulin induces insulin resistance, and therefore makes your pancreas have to compensate by secreting more insulin, which will eventually lead to more body fat. Now, the downstream effect of that is that anyone that tries to diet by some of the more accepted methods, more established methods, let's say, for example, Weight Watchers or Slimming World or anything like that, will usually remove carbohydrates from the diet as to correct that hypothesis. Now, it doesn't change the fact that the one thing at play is energy balance. So by removing carbohydrates, assuming you're not overcompensating on everything else, or you've just removed most of a whole macronutrient group out of your diet, one would assume, like I say, if you're not overcompensating with everything else, that at least in part you've reduced some of your calorie intake, which then leads to weight loss, which also is key to point out that usually when people join Weight Watchers or Slimming World or anything like that, And that first week or two, they see, especially the first week, they see a huge drop in weight. They'll be like, they'll go to their Weight Watchers meeting and they'll be like, oh my God, Betty, look, I dropped 6 pounds this week. Yeah, maybe. But I guarantee that out of those 6 pounds, at least 4 of them, probably more 5, are water. The reason for that is that more carbohydrates you eat, more carbohydrate saturation in your muscle tissue. And if you have more carbohydrates in your muscle, you also have more water in your muscle. And water weighs the same as everything else. The rule of thumb is that for every gram of carbohydrate you eat, about 3 to 4 grams of water also go into the muscle. You can do the maths yourself, but it can mean a bucket load of water, almost literally. Now, the other thing that tends to happen, and I'm just going to read a little excerpt for you guys out of the nutrition course I did a few years back, talking about how the goalpost moves whenever it comes to carbohydrates. So it goes a little bit like this. Carbs make everyone fat because of insulin. But the studies show that matching calories and protein means there's no difference. Carbs Zealot goes, that's because calories were matched. Ad libitum low carb means people eat less. Ad libitum basically means you're free to eat whatever you want. So ad libitum low carbohydrate means people eat less. Answer is ad libitum low carbohydrate diets tend to be higher in protein. Protein is in fact more satiating. So it's still about the calories because you eat more protein, you feel fuller, you don't eat as much. Carb Zealot. Carbs make people hungry and they overeat / can't lose weight. Except that this is just highly subjective. Different people feel different things when they eat different macronutrients. Not only that, on a bit of a tangent, in the satiety scale, so there's this scale called the satiety scale, and they've measured how full different foods make you for a length of time. And it turns out white potato is one of the most satiating things you can eat. So think whenever you have a jacket potato, how much of a couch potato you want to be. Now, going back, so Carb Zealot then goes, overweight people are carb intolerant. What we're saying here is that we should individualize carb intake. Carb Zealot, it's not carbohydrate, it's sugar. So is that due to palatability and therefore energy intake as opposed to hormonal issues? Hopefully, you guys can see where this is going. It's like the goalpost always moves. It's carbs because of insulin, ends up being sugar. Well, the thing with sugar gets a really bad rep as well. We're going to see how carbohydrates effectively become sugar. But the thing is you also have to take into account palatability. So if I give you a bowl of white rice, plain, unflavored, unseasoned white rice, how much of that are you going to eat? If you're starving, you might eat a fair chunk. But you're going to get to a point where you go, actually, I'm done. Now, if I lather a bunch of sweet chili sauce all over that, you might finish the bowl. Why is that? It's still just white rice. And the reason for that is that, well, a little bit of sweet chili sauce greases the wheels, right? It makes things a little bit nicer to eat. It's a little bit more palatable. So palatability matters when it comes to food intake, especially carbohydrate intake, because, like I say, carbs are sugar and sugar is nice. Okay, enough of a rant about carb and insulin hypothesis. So if we just have a quick look, you tend to hear floating around complex carbs, simple carbs. What the hell does any of that mean? And complex carbohydrates effectively are just long chains of simple carbohydrates. That is literally it. Obviously, different configurations, they look slightly different, they perform different things in the body when you eat them, but that's effectively what they are. And most of them, the exception of fiber and some resistant starch that we're going to talk about in a second, most carbohydrates break down to simple carbohydrates. So what are simple carbohydrates? It's effectively sugar. That's literally what it is. So you've got, I won't go too into the weeds with this, but you have mono and disaccharides. Sugar molecules are saccharide molecules. And you have mono and di. So single sugar or two sugar molecules attached together. And those are your simple carbs. And your more complex carbs are effectively combinations of those. Now, I did say that about fiber and resistant starch, and often when you eat carbohydrates, assuming the total of your carbohydrate intake isn't just white bread, often when you have carbohydrates, you're also having fiber, and that is because fiber is in fact a carbohydrate. Now, it doesn't usually count towards your calorie intake, and that's because it's not in fact digested, but it does play a vital role in the body because it ferments in your gut. Different types of fiber, different foods provide you with prebiotics. You've all heard of probiotics. Depending on the food you're eating, on the plant you're eating, you get prebiotic, and prebiotic are effectively resistant starch that your gut bacteria can eat so they can grow and stay healthy. And all of that stuff, like I say, ferment in the gut, and it's all good stuff for you. You can usually manage IBS symptoms by playing around with your fiber intake as well. By the way, if you're unsure, contact a professional. If you're unsure what professional to contact, then drop me a message. Slide into my DMs, baby. You can message me on Instagram at Bruno Dalladoni. That is absolutely fine. And we can have a chat and hopefully I can help. But just remember, fiber is good for you. Too much fiber is a problem because too much fiber can bung you up. And let's be honest, nobody wants to be constipated. The other thing to note as well in terms of fiber intake is that the average UK consumption of fiber is around 15 grams a day. The recommended fiber intake is between 30 and 35 a day. What that tells me is that most people are too busy chowing down on white bread and are busy enough having some potatoes. That was a joke. Have green vegetables, please, guys. But joking aside, just have a varied diet that consists primarily of vegetables and fruit, but primarily vegetables, and then have whatever else you're having. Now, vegetables does in fact include root vegetables like potatoes and sweet potatoes because they also have fiber. So have all of that fun stuff. Now, to finish up, hopefully I've done a good enough job of explaining to you guys that you don't need carbohydrates to survive, but you will just generally perform better if you have them. You perform better because assuming you're eating a balanced, varied diet, your brain will thank you for it because carbohydrates are in fact its primary fuel source. You perform better in the gym. You perform better in life because you're fueling your muscles so that they can contract and just do their thing more effectively. Do you need them? No, you can absolutely go into ketosis and your body will figure itself out. But for most people, and this is important, most, because there are situations when you might want to go keto for health reasons, and we'll cover that off at a different stage. But for most people, the cost-benefit equation just doesn't really land on the side of going keto or just cutting out carbohydrates. For one, it sucks. If you want to go out with your friends, you've had a beer, that's gone out of the window. You want to go out with your friends, they want to go for pizza, you can't have a pizza, you're awkward with your Tupperware. You know what I mean? You have to balance, like health also takes into account your quality of life. And if you can't eat anything, because let's be honest, carbohydrates are just everywhere, then you might find, and I'm not saying you will, but you might find that your quality of life decreases, at least in part. Like I said, carbohydrates won't inherently make you fat. It's all dependent on your energy intake. So assuming you're eating balanced amount of calories for your needs, you won't be putting on the chub. And like I say, if you have them, you perform better in the gym, which in and of itself, you burn more calories, therefore balancing that equation out, at least to some degree. Hopefully this was helpful. And if you enjoyed this, send it to your friends, especially if you have some low carb zealots that you really want to wind up, especially if you've got Margaret in sales and you really want to wind her up. Send that to her. As always, rate us 5 stars, like, share, subscribe. If you guys have feedback for me, please share it with me on Instagram. If you're listening to the podcast, please also share that on your socials, because that really helps promote the podcast. And being that it's only a little fledgling podcast, I'd massively appreciate it. Thanks, guys, and I will be seeing you next time.